Prayer didn't kill Goliath. David did. Now, if you're a church guy, that probably just made you uncomfortable. Good. Stay with me. If you are not a church guy, and I don't need you to be, then understand that what David did in that valley has nothing to do with religion and everything to do with how a prepared man eliminates a problem that has everyone else frozen. Maybe there's a giant in your life right now or at work. Maybe it's been there for several weeks, a few months, even years. What I'm going to show you today is something from one of the oldest battle accounts ever written that you've probably never seen before. I'm an F-16 pilot. I study how warriors think and move. And I'm telling you, David was not some desperate shepherd boy who got lucky. He was calculated. He was a predator. And by the end of this video, you're going to see exactly how David thought, how he moved, and why Goliath died with his sword still in its sheath. Let's go. So let me start with a quick recap from 1 Samuel 17, just a summary of the whole account of David and Goliath. And if you want more, go to 1 Samuel 17 and read it for yourself. But effectively, you have the Philistine army and the Israelites, and they line up across from each other to go to war. And Goliath, who was approximately 10 feet tall, was the Philistine hero, their champion. And he came out and basically challenged for 40 days straight and said, hey, Israel, why don't you send your champion and the two of us will have a duel, and whoever dies, then their side becomes the servant of the victor's side. And so he issued that challenge, and this dude was a professional warrior. He had bronze armor, and the account describes all the things they had, how heavy it was. He had a 16-pound spear head on his spear, like big dude, right? And the result is that every single man of war that is in the Israelite army was terrified. They would literally run from him when he would look their way. They were paralyzed with fear. And then you've got David, who's a teenager, and his dad, he's like working at home for his dad as a shepherd. And his dad says to him, hey, dude, your brothers are part of the army. I want you to go deliver them some food. And so David obeys his father. He goes out there. While he's there, he hears Goliath's taunt. And in response, he doesn't have fear. There's many things. He inquires, asks some questions, whatever. But what we see is this righteous indignation that David has in defense of God's name and God's people. And David says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And then David volunteers to go fight the guy. And the king of the Israelites, his name is Saul, king tries to give him armor. And David says, no, if David tries it on, and then he says, dude, no thanks. Like, this doesn't fit. I'm not trained how to use this stuff. No thanks. And so what does David do? He goes to the stream. He picks up 5 smooth stones, and then he goes and fights the giant. And it says in 1 Samuel 17, 45 and 46, before he even throws a stone, he tells Goliath exactly what's about to happen. He says, I will strike you down and cut off your head. And he announced the kill before he made the kill, and then he ran. All right, so we're going to talk through 3 different teaching points of what we can pull from the story and how it applies to our lives. And then at the end, I'm going to give you just a quick couple of different points of application, what this looks like in our lives today. And so the first point is this, what did David pack? He packed 5 stones. Why? So David didn't grab 5 stones because he was a bad shot. He grabbed 5 stones because Goliath had 4 brothers. David's goal was to exterminate the family line. Okay, where do I come up with this? If you check 2 Samuel 21, verses 15 through 22, you see Goliath's 4 brothers are named. They're listed there, and they're all Philistine warriors. And so when David went into that valley with his 5-round magazine, if you will, the intent was 1 stone per target, 1 shot, 1 kill. In other words, David had a premeditated strategy. It was not some kind of desperate improv on the fly, trying to come up with a quick, contingency game plan. He had a plan, and he said, I'm going to go kill Goliath and his brothers. Now, some people think David was lucky. He was reactive, and I'm saying, no, sir. David was brilliantly strategic. He was cold. He was calculated. Now, a lot of men, they walk into the battles of life completely under-resourced because they're unaware of the real enemy. David realized he was not just targeting 1 giant. He was ready to target the giant and his 4 brothers. He said, I'm going to take on all 5. Now, a lot of men how do we apply this? A lot of men know that they have a giant in their life. But what they don't know is how many there are, or who's the brothers or the friends that giant is bringing with it, the obstacle, what are the second, third, fourth, fifth layer effects? And so the question becomes, what is your enemy, or who is your enemy? Probably what? What is your enemy? And how many other giants are with your enemy? Now, let's just use porn as an example because that is not talked about enough, but statistics show a overwhelmingly large percentage of men are entangled with pornography. So let's say that maybe your giant, if you will, is porn. Then my question is, well, what are the four brothers? And you could look and you could say isolation, shame, identity lies, not knowing who God says you are and falling for lies about who you believe you are, unresolved loneliness. Okay, do you see the pattern? So it's not just like, hey, porn might be the giant like Goliath that's out there taunting you, but there are probably four other brothers that come with the giant. And so you need a stone for each one. You don't win by killing the big one and ignoring the others. So that's the point here, is that when David packed 5 stones, he did it intentionally, strategically, because he was prepared to eliminate the entire family line of the enemy. Now, our second point is, why did David run? And if you read 1 Samuel 17, you will see 3 distinct times in the text where David ran. Now, his running, it shows urgency, but not the kind of urgency that a lot of people today have, not a busyness, not a fear of being late or falling behind or not getting there in time, or feeling guilty that, hey, I'm not where I'm supposed to be, I better, look important and hurry up. It was none of that. His running, it demonstrates bravery under fire, sure, but it's more than that. David, I want you to understand the warrior mindset of David. He was a predator executing a pre-planned kill. And now that you understand why he brought the 5 stones, the running, it completely changes meaning. So the 3 times he ran were this. He ran in 1 Samuel 17, verse 22, to check on his brothers. When he got to the war zone, when he got to the combat zone, he wasn't walking around, he ran. And he was on a food run, a food delivery. They were like, hey, his dad was like, can you be the Uber Eats delivery for your brothers? And when David showed up, he took that seriously. When he was in the combat zone, he moved with urgency well before he was even in combat. And so the application is how we move in normal mundane things. It reveals how we will move in critical situations. Because men who kind of wander through ordinary days, they don't suddenly become urgent when the battle starts. Who you are affects, like what you do on a normal day affects how you behave on an intense day. So the second time that he runs is in verse 48, when he ran toward Goliath. The scripture says, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet Goliath. In other words, when you look at the story, all the other men in Israel, they were retreating, they were running away, or they were frozen, they were paralyzed, they were in fear. And what did David do? He ran toward the target. He ran toward the giant. Now, you could say that the attack itself was actually the speed. And I'm like, if I was Goliath and I'm used to everybody running from me, I would probably be surprised and caught off guard if someone is running at me. Like, what? And I think Goliath didn't have time to process what was happening because he wasn't accustomed to other people running his direction. And so that was a huge psychological, strategic advantage, tactical advantage really, that David had when he ran toward Goliath, the second time that we see him run. The third time we see him run is after he throws the stone. In verse 51, the stone had knocked Goliath down, and some texts say that the stone itself killed Goliath, and some say that the stone knocked him down, and then, depending what translation you read, that then when David cut off Goliath's head, that is what killed Goliath. But what we see, regardless, is that the third time David ran is when he ran, in verse 51, to cut off Goliath's head. Now, what does this mean? A lot of men, if they're fighting a giant in their life, they might knock down the enemy and then they will stop there. But not David. He ran to the body, he drew Goliath's own sword, and he finished the kill. Now, you don't see him doing a end zone celebration prematurely. He didn't wait to see if what he had done worked. He ran to confirm that what he had done worked. He ran to confirm the kill and remove all doubt. And so the application for us is that there are a lot of men who are trying to overcome a struggle to defeat the giants in their life, and they might win the first battle, and then they walk away before the enemy is dead. And we see the model that David gave us was, don't let your giant get back up. And what's the most sure way to ensure that your enemy can't get back up? You cut off his head. So the third point is this, is that Goliath died. David killed Goliath while Goliath's sword was still sheathed. Now think about that. Goliath never drew his primary weapon, okay? He was eliminated before he could even fight back, which shows us that the best time to kill your enemy is before your enemy is ready to fight. Now we see in verse 51 that David, he used Goliath's own sword to cut off his head. And when David got to Goliath, he had to unsheath it. So Goliath's sword was still in its sheath when David got there. And we see in verse 45 that Goliath came to the fight with a sword, a spear, and a javelin. Now, the text does not specifically indicate if he used the javelin, which is a throwing weapon, or if he used the spear, which can be thrown or can be thrusted. But we do know for certain that he didn't use the sword because it explicitly says that the sword was in the sheath. So then we see David, his physical weapon was a sling with a stone. His psychological weapon was the speed with which he attacked. He moved from an unexpected angle because he had a sling, not a sword. And Goliath never got a chance to use his sword, to use the weapons of his arsenal. So the application for us is that your enemy is most dangerous when you give him time to prepare. When your enemy has time to set up, the giants in your life are the strongest when they're entrenched, when they have time to take out their sword. So you could look at temptation. The longer you remain in temptation, the stronger it gets. Isolation, shame, all these things. But when you have speed to attack the enemy, that is actually a form of showing yourself mercy because you're not giving the enemy time to draw his weapons. The longer you wait to address those giants, the more fortified, the stronger, the more lethal, the more dangerous they get to cause you harm. And so it could be a hard conversation that you've been avoiding. It is probably harder 6 months later than it would have been immediately on day 1 or day 2. So the point is this, whatever your giant is, whether it's, conflict that you're trying to resolve, whether it's a porn addiction, whatever it is, don't give the giant time to draw his sword. Now, let me be clear, because I started off saying that prayer didn't kill Goliath, and that is absolutely true. But let me be clear, I don't mean that David went to war without God. What I mean is that David knew who he was, he put his confidence in God, and then he took action, okay? So he knew who he was. He came with identity. We see in verse 45, he says, I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. David knew who he was, he knew whose he was, and then his confidence was sourced in God, okay? His faith was very, very real, but he still threw a stone, guys. He still ran at the enemy. And we know that James 2:17, it says, faith without works is dead. And so when I say that, hey, prayer didn't kill Goliath, David did, I want to emphasize that part, that David took action, okay? David had both faith and action. He prayed and he moved. Now, the problem is that most men, they've been handed a spirituality by their local church, sometimes, or by culture, most of the time, that basically they stop at prayer alone and they suggest that that is effective. And they say, hey, prayer is the most effective form of spiritual warfare, or of defeating the giants in your life, or of overcoming the obstacles. And I'm saying, no, men, that is not what David modeled. David took courageous action to confront the problem aggressively, decisively. So understand that faith is the fuel, but action is the actual engine, okay? David came in the name of the Lord, but he still threw a rock. The problem isn't prayer. The problem is men who stop at prayer and call that warfare. I'm like, no, that is like, I fly jets. You don't just pray and hope you win. You pray and then you execute, you take action. All right. Now, today is the 13th, and I was reading Proverbs 13 this morning. And in verse 4 of the Passion Translation, which is what I'm reading for the Proverbs this month, Proverbs 13, verse 4, Passion Translation says, the slacker wants it all and ends up with nothing, but the hard worker ends up with all that he longed for. Okay, so catch this. The wisdom here is that diligence is the path to longings fulfilled. Okay, it says the slacker wants it all and ends up with nothing. But the hard worker, okay, the one who is diligent, ends up with all that he longed for. So diligence is the path to longings fulfilled. Now, there are too many Christians who they sit around and they talk to God, they talk about God, but they don't actually get up and take action. And the wisdom in Proverbs 13:4 is that without diligence, you can want it all you want, but you'll end up with nothing if you don't do something, okay? And that is especially true on a physical battlefield, and it is even more true in the spirit world. And when there is a giant that is opposing you in your life, you can pray about it all you want. You can talk to God, and you should first. That is more powerful. But until you start throwing rocks, giants don't die. So, application for us. How do we fight like David? I would encourage you in 6 things. 1 is to understand your enemy. Like, name your giant and consider if he has any brothers. Like, what is the family tree of the biggest opponent that you're facing? And the wisdom here is don't fight the symptom while letting the root stay alive. And so there's a lot of men, I'll just use purity and porn as an example because that's a very personal part of my story, is that a lot of men, they look at the symptom, which is, hey, I feel tempted to look at porn, but they don't look at the roots that are below that, which would be the loneliness or the isolation or the shame, like the things that are actually deeper. And if those stay alive, then it's only a matter of time before willpower gives out and the symptom resurfaces. So the first point, how to fight like David, is to understand the enemy. Do a target analysis, if you will. And then number 2 is to bring enough stones to the battle, right? Match your resources against the actual targets. And so what this would look like in a purity context would be things like community or truth or accountability or identity. You do need a stone per giant. And David knew there's one giant with 4 brothers. So he said, I'm bringing 5 stones. And so for us, application is bring enough weapons to kill enough enemy. All right, the third point is run, okay? We see David ran 3 times. He did not delay. Urgency then is a skill, and you can practice that in the mundane. He got to the combat zone. He's delivering food, and he ran, okay? The man who runs on a food delivery is the one who runs toward giants. Okay, fourth, declare before you throw. In other words, David told Goliath what was about to happen, and then it happened. So what we see modeled is that David spoke out truth. He declared his identity out loud, and then the evidence supports it. And that is not something that is arrogant. It is the model of faith that David gave us. And then number 5, guys, this is huge in terms of warrior mindset that we learned from David. Finish the kill. Okay, David didn't celebrate knocking down the giant. He ran to the body and he chopped off the head. He cut off the head to confirm the kill. There are a lot of men out there who they walk away from a half-won battle and then they wonder, why does this enemy keep getting back up? All right, so finish the kill. Number 6, move before your enemy has time to draw their weapon. Okay, so this is the last one. The longer that you wait, the more deadly your enemy gets. Like truly imagine, what would the battle have turned out? What would it have looked like if David had given Goliath time to draw his sword? I don't think the battle would have ended the same. I think there would have been a different outcome. And so practically act today. Like we talk about these 6 things or application. How do you want to fight like David? Understand your enemy. Pack enough stones, enough truths, enough weapons to eliminate the enemy, and not just the 1, but the 5, if there are 5. And then run, declare before you throw, finish the kill, and then don't give your enemy time to draw their weapons. So practically that means take action today. That hard conversation, the longer you wait, the harder it gets to have conflict resolution. Or the more you let shame continue to develop in isolation, the harder it is to break out. So take action. Now, if we zoom out, we see David, he was a teenager with a sling, but Goliath was a professional warrior who even had an armor bearer. Okay, the difference wasn't talent, it wasn't size, it wasn't title or pedigree, it was identity, preparation, and speed. David knew who he was. He prepared. He packed enough rounds. He brought enough weapons to the fight to eliminate the enemy and all of Goliath's brothers. And then speed. He ran toward what everyone else ran from. And he moved so fast that Goliath died with his sword still in its sheath. That is how you fight. That is how you kill giants. So if you are staring down a giant right now and you've been waiting for the right moment, this is it. I have built a free community of men who are doing the right thing, that are done waiting, warriors just like you, who do the target analysis, who study the enemy, who pick the right stones, pack enough stones, and refuse to fight alone. The link is in the description. Come find your fire team. Stay lethal.